stream today about how I've been working with creative AI as a writer, and also some sort of guiding thoughts and conclusions on how to be creative with AI in the state that it currently is. Um, so this is CoCreator, the AI that I have been working with, and I've been using it a lot for outlining, which it has been great for because it's basically having another friend with you as you write. Someone who's a bit rambly, someone who kind of misses the mark sometimes, um, but sometimes hits it exactly. So it's a bit like, you're on a raft paddling through the sea, and there's things nearby passing by, debris, detritus, and you are sorting out what sorts of things are productive. You're steering yourself in productive ways, but also sometimes you have to get rid of the trash. Sometimes avoid it, or sometimes this one thing might inspire you to go somewhere else, or make you think, oh, this isn't exactly it, but it's a good idea. Like the plot structure is cool, or maybe a different character, or we should add a new character to introduce a new character. They shouldn't do what it said, but it's the type of thing that we need. And so it's a great tool for exploration, for navigation, and um, it's great for when you have a very small idea and you want to make it bigger. um, I think that's what I've really found for this outlining process. Um, and so some of the things that we have been doing is like figuring out, for example, how characters in the novel I was writing as part of NaNoWriMo um, get to certain points in the plot that we want them to go to. Um, for example, this part was generated by the AI where um, one of the characters uses kind of the central idea of the story, which is going from like being assigned to different bodies, and she does that as like a point of conflict with the other character. There's also, the AI introduced this element of arguing and fighting between the couple as a way to get these characters to a point where they are um, where one character, Melody, finds the key information that her husband is part of a war. Um, the AI also is sometimes useful for filling out little details, especially I think it helps world building things that you don't think you need. Oftentimes I find that when writers have a specific thing that they're trying to make in their world, they either have a strong idea of what that should be already, or they have strong opinions about how it ought to be. And so, because AI kind of has a lot of things floating in that sea that it sends to you, writers tend to balk at that when they're thinking very specifically. But sometimes it'll add like a delightful little detail that you weren't expecting but fits well, or gives you the inspiration to make something that fits well. For example, this whole like lab baby part, I'm also not quite sure about it, but it's nice to have something there, so I'm thinking about it. In this futuristic world, babies are created in a lab and grown to the age of 4. Then they are put into a machine and their consciousness is transferred into a clone body that looks like an adult. There is some tinkering to be done there, but um, the idea of lab babies was something that I hadn't even come up with until the AI brought that up for me. So again, I think it's something that's really great for taking your specific idea and linking it to other things, generalizing it, giving you a direction to go. Um, so I think that's great for the outlining part. There's also, of course, a great use for it is, let's see, is generating some more content for something that you are in the middle of writing. Um, at times, there was a short story that's actually currently being published in Synoptique magazine that I filled in some parts and some scenes that I didn't really want to write with an AI. You know, it'll be like, oh, it's the discussion that they have to have before they go to this event. And I don't really want to write it because it's not that interesting, but it's necessary. And so having the AI there to write it for me, like, it's really good at figuring out what genre you're writing in, taking that structure, and building on that structure for you. I think it was this short story. Let's see. Oop, this goes to the top. Um, oh yeah, I think part of it was like this conversation, um, or this announcement. Like, there's a cyborg dad. He is talking about his life, how he, became a cyborg, and I needed to have the audience members react to it. But it's kind of tedious, and it's like a lot more effort than reward writing out like different ways of saying the audience reacts. And then there's also like, how much do I write that the audience is reacting? So the AI was able to build out those parts of me for me, and it just made the process so much easier, and it got me to a finished result so much sooner. So that's something that this creative writing AI is great at doing, absolutely. Also, yeah, I just slipped in that my short story is getting published, so I'm very excited for that. And you all will be able to read it. I will probably, since a lot of you are interfacing with me through this stream, I'll probably do like a little short stream about how to find this short story. It might be the first published short story with an AI. I don't know. I haven't done my research, but it could be true, because I don't really know of other things like this happening. So super exciting. Um, but yeah, so again, one great thing, outlining. Second great thing, doing the filler work that you don't really want to do. Um, I find that the reason it's good for filler and not for maybe other types of content is that I find that with a lot of writers, we have something, or even creative people in general, we have something kind of like precious that has really compelled us to create this work in the first place. So maybe it's like, I want to write this novel to explore the idea of like of love and cyborgism and how those two can be intertwined. Um, and so the scenes where those ideas are the most prominent, you as the creator are really laboring over. You really want it to be something special. Um, and so you kind of don't want other people's involvement in it. And in fact, when you bring it to a workshop or something, people say, oh, I think this doesn't work. You're kind of resistant to that. So I think that the natural synergy is in the other sorts of scenes, again, that you have to get done. You don't feel like it, you're lazy, you've been writing, you have no motivation, but it's very important. And so the AI can do that work for you. It's fantastic. Let's see. The last thing that AI has been great for has been our projects on Dream Lounge. So again, Dream Lounge is being developed by the same person who is developing CoCreator. But it is a tool for interactive fiction. You can write and read and co-write stories that have different branches that go down. So, you start with the beginning. You're a dog in a space shuttle. You're approaching a planet. And then from there on, you can visit these continued branches. You can do it in a typical interactive fiction story where it's like, which thing do you want to investigate? Which direction do you want to go? But you could also, like, I don't know, make it like different perspectives of the same event, kind of like a fractured story situation. The other cool thing about Dream Lounge that makes it different from other like types of tools like this, like Twine, for example, is that you can invite other authors to write the same story with you. So they can write their own branches, they can write their own interpretations, stuff like that. So these apps are kind of both destabilizing the idea that an author has to be a single person, which I think is super cool. Part of the reason I was so stoked to get on this project. But CoCreator has been great generating these interactive fiction stories with Dream Lounge because it is kind of bringing in things like from all directions while you're floating on the sea. And typically, if you're writing a linear story, you have to pick and choose what you get to keep, what's the focus of the story, and what you have to throw away. But Dream Lounge has been super cool to write with CoCreator because it's been so fun to do with you all viewers, where it's like, they kind of, it throws like a cool idea in, and it's like, well, that wasn't what we were originally going for, but that's super cool. Let's follow that thread and throw it in there. And it has a snowballing effect of like introducing you to new possibilities. I think that's really something that, you know, that makes it good for this sort of interactive fiction thing and for the outlining. It's introducing you to new possibilities. Um, I want to say, like, this might be a broad generalization, but it's like new content possibilities within a similar structure. So maybe that's why it's good for both, like, filling in the scenes you don't want to do and also outlining and stuff. It's like, I found that, something that writers can say sometimes is like, okay, the AI generated this part of my outline, but my character would never do that. Um, but it's kind of like, it's not the specifics that are going to be really similar with AI. It's like, it might make your character do something they wouldn't do, but it's kind of like they get the fantasy structure. It gets like, or it gets a genre structure. If it's fantasy or if it's, sci-fi or whatever genre, historical fiction, um, it carries on the structure pretty well. And if you're writing an outline, it will continue to write an outline, structure, genre, but then like it'll add new details that are different from what you already have. And so I think the duality of having, fresh details but continuing structure is really the way that this AI works. And if it's something that is like really interesting to think about when you're working with it. So, okay. So that's all the things that AI has really helped me with as I'm doing my creative writing. Um, I also wanted to talk about like my summary of how I am working with this AI in a moment-to-moment basis. So what I was doing here for this novel brainstorming um, and what I'm kind of doing here is like I would fill in, what this section is with a different font. The font the AI doesn't care about, but that's for me to say, this is information for the AI so it can situate itself. It knows like where we're starting to work from and it can pull in things that are more relevant. I have characters. The AI is really good at picking up on this is a character and we're going to repeat that character. So melody. And I'm putting in kind of keywords to really triangulate the genre of my writing piece. So empire, androids, planets, clones, consciousness, crimes, stuff like that. And so the AI is starting to triangulate, okay, so all these words means that this is sci-fi and it's a space opera. Like if I hadn't put planets, empire maybe space opera, but the second I put planets, it's like, okay, space opera. So I situate the AI. I start writing the stuff that I'm working on. That's why I have this big, nice heading here. And if I'm looking for something specific, I will prompt the AI with the beginning of a sentence that it will then fill in. It can pick up, again, structure really well. So if I say, like, over here, and say, I wanted to say, as my last sentence, it will fill that in pretty well, and that's a way of really guiding it to be pretty directed and on point. Whereas sometimes I'm kind of sitting there like, I want to figure out more about this, but there's nothing specific that I really want. In which case, that would be a great time to just kind of end the sentence. This is done, and just hit co-create, and it kind of just brings in whatever, and it tends to be sometimes a little bit random, sometimes pretty cool. So that's kind of like the see what happens situation. There's also, right, the difference between CoCreate and multiple choice. CoCreate is like one single thing that it just generates and throws in the body. Multiple choice gives you like 3 different things that you can click on to add in. I think I tend to do multiple choice when I am trying to help the AI narrow down on what it wants. Um, so, like, it sees 3 different ways that space opera could go. It could be really tech heavy. I don't know. It could focus on the planet or the level of space and stuff. And so, because there's so many ways it can go, I don't want the AI to just give me something. I want to start directing it. But I'm not. The reason I'm using AI to generate is I'm not quite sure what I want yet. So it's coming from this moment of like, I'm not super sure what I want, but I also want don't want the AI to just give me anything. That's when I hit multiple choice and it starts giving me options, and hopefully I can start narrowing it down from there. If not, then I just kind of keep going, or I have to brainstorm myself, or you all give me cool ideas. So yeah, that's kind of the workflow. And yeah, I tend to hit co-create when it's in a really good place where the AI is kind of, or I'm getting really specific. So the AI, um, even when it's kind of like random or rambling, is hitting the mark more. Um, that's when I tend to use co-create, or when I don't mind if it surprises me. Um, and so if you watch my past streams, I also have an archive of them on YouTube. It's a lot of like, I'll write a little bit, say like, oh, I have an idea for this, that she gets transferred into Soldier's body. And then, but I don't really know what happens next. Okay, co-create multiple choice, we'll see. Then put the next part, oh, that makes me think of this, or I still haven't thought of anything yet, but I think this is appropriate. Let's keep generating. So it's this very iterative process of having a bit of my contribution and then a little bit of the AI's contribution, and then continuing to roll in that format. Um, yeah, one cautionary thing I would say with the AI that you have to be a little bit careful of when you're using it is that some things the AI picks up on really well, and that's a good thing, like a character. But sometimes they run away with that. And so something I suggest is like, this might be a feature in future versions of CoCreator, but for now, something I do is I have a separate document, like a Word document or just somewhere I can paste my text. And I kind of take out the things that are not super relevant in that moment. Sometimes I have to use synonyms for the things that I actually write in my novel. So, for example, this happened with the animation AI that we were using previously, which is that I put in Android, and it started generating like phones. I meant like a robot Android, but it started generating phones, and then I put like don't generate phones, and then it started generating like the Android logo, because it there's such a strong association of Android with the phone type on the internet. And so in that case, you kind of have to say something like cyborg instead, so that it begins to get the right type. I would say that was more prominent with the animation AI, because here CoCreator has a lot of context for this word Android. It has empire, planets, clones, so it kind of gets that we're in the space opera sci-fi genre, and works from there. But the prompts for the animation AI that I've been using are a bit shorter. This is not one I've written, but they tend to be shorter. Like galactic nebula, that's 2 words. It doesn't have all that context to understand, okay, this is like this type of Android, not that type of Android. So that's something that you should be aware of as you're working with. You're definitely gonna stumble upon that and be like, oh, I didn't realize it would do this. So with CoCreator, the benefit is that it generates it pretty quickly, and you can just see it there, and you can delete it or not. With the animation AI, you have to, it's a little bit harder because it takes a long time to generate an animation. So you really have to be watching the output and seeing if it's going in the right direction or not. And it takes a very long time too. It can take like, I think typically like 2 hours to a little more than 2 hours to generate like a 17-second animation, sometimes longer, depending on the length of the animation I'm trying to generate. So I really had to be very careful. You have to watch for that. Um, but yeah, I want to say those are kind of the major points I wanted to touch on, which is like what the AI is good at, and the process of writing with it. And I think I will also discuss like a couple of things that I'm excited for with AI and like why I like doing this. Now that you've sat through all the information that's kind of relevant for you, now we can talk about interesting things that I want to talk about, which is I have been an ambassador for CoCreator. Um, I have gotten to talk with the creator of CoCreator and of Dream Lounge on like what the mission is, where this is going. That's something I've been super excited about. Is one part of CoCreator and Dream Lounge's mission is to kind of challenge our current ideas of authorship and writing, where we often think of it's almost always a single individual, right? Whereas in other pieces of media like film and whatever, there's like we know that there's many people involved. But writing we think of as like for one person alone. And it's a very lonely activity sometimes. It's hard, you pour your heart out into this thing and then it gets torn apart at workshop, or you're afraid that no one likes it, or you self-publish it and then you're like, why isn't it getting any sales? Is it my writing? Is it, the marketing? What is it? And so it's a very lonely activity that the creator is trying to turn into something that's like, I don't know, just different from our old ideas of a single person. And I find that exciting because it's like creativity and art doesn't have to come from just one person. There's so many other forms of media that have many people involved. Film, TV, with the writer rooms, and even like classical painting would be like you would have like, Raphael, this is a work by Raphael, but in reality he was more of like a director. At the very least there's many people like students of his who would actually be painting, and that happened very often. And so this is kind of aligning writing with more of that model, but also just like, I don't know, changing the way we think about a medium that's established, and I find that very exciting. Some other things I've been thinking about also are like the way that we have kind of like collective knowledge. So I believe both of these AIs, animation and the writing one, are trained on just like the body of the internet. I know that CoCreator is trained on GPT-3, or is GPT-3 OpenAI, so it's been trained on the collective body of the internet up until October 2019. So kind of everyone who's ever posted on the internet is part of this. And it's this collective consciousness that is kind of being filtered to us by writing this. And I think that's wonderful because it's like when you're making work like this, you're making it to touch people. You're making it to like reach across the boundaries of individuality, to take that deep emotion that you have felt within yourself and present it to someone else and either help them feel that emotion or remind them of when they felt that emotion in like a new light or a new context. You're taking something that's deeply individual, reaching out to someone else and kind of making that thing universal while calling to their individuality. It's like not a thing that's either individual or common, but it's kind of both. And I think that using AI to make it reflects that. It reflects the way that we try to make work to connect to each other, and it builds that in from the outset. So I find that to be super, super exciting, um, kind of like a collective effervescence situation. Um, and yeah, I guess like the main and I the last thing that writing with AI makes me excited about is like I think we have this idea of like people versus technology. You know, oftentimes like when the conversation of AI comes up with people who aren't in like tech spheres, it's very much like, oh my gosh, you know, the AI are gonna take our jobs, AI are gonna, you know, rise up and like I don't know, something bad. There's gonna be conflict and we have to prevent them from getting there. And gosh, I forget what it's called, but there's that like there's like the list of like commandments or something for like when you make a robot or make AI where it's like, you know, they can't harm people, they can't I don't know. The main thing is like there's this idea of like competition that like AI will compete with us. Um, they'll try to overtake us, overthrow us. And then people within the tech sphere kind of just see them as like a tool to be used for a certain situation. But really, the way I'm thinking about it and the way that Donna Haraway, my I don't know, my teacher, indirectly thinks about it is that like human beings and technology have always kind of worked together. Um, to the point where like, you know, thinking about things, we don't think of them as technology nowadays. We think of like, you know, the aesthetics of sci-fi, spaceships, like flashing lights, or like, you know, Black Mirror style, like everything's smooth and like, you know, kind of Apple um, aesthetics. But things like this chair that I'm sitting on, that's technology. Like that's something that people created and designed and we use every day. And I don't think it makes sense to say people and technology are at odds or they're separate. Um, I think there's ways in which tech can be used for good and it can be used for evil, but I don't think it's something that we can just say we're not going to engage with and try to leave behind. And so a lot of what my work is, a lot of what my writing is seeing how like human emotion and like care and meaning can be made alongside or with um, the newer technologies that we have. That's why so much of my work is sci-fi, things with cyborgs, but also with a lot of like interpersonal conflict and emotion, like, you know, bonds of bonds or contracts of things like marriage, for example, with a sci-fi bent. So it's like all um, this sort of stuff. So yeah, I those are kind of like my thoughts for why this is very exciting. Um, I can't do my typical Saturday morning stream tomorrow, so I wanted to tell this all to you today. And I also wanted to say, like I mentioned in my last stream, thank you so much for watching because I'm kind of moving on. I won't be doing this anymore in this way. Um, and it's because have I'm about to start a job as a game designer in a game development studio. So I'll be doing game design things from now on, and not quite sure how my schedule is going to look if I would be able to, you know, continue to stream similar things or, I don't know, work with AI anymore. It'll probably be a sphere that I'm still occupying. But again, just things are going to look different in the future, and I wanted to wrap up this section, especially because I've had such a wonderful time with all of you. It's been great having you pop in the chat, telling me ideas about like, I don't know, more things for the writing, more things for the novel, having a great time with you all, making these branches and like being wowed together. by these like possibilities that AI are throwing at us. So yeah, I I'm so sad to leave you all, but I hope there's ways that we can continue to connect. Um, if you are ever around, maybe I'll do a couple more streams kind of updating you all on my status. If I transition away from Twitch, I would love to do some, give you some information on where we can continue to connect with each other. So thank you so, so much for joining me on this journey. I hope we can continue it. If not, we'll stay in touch. Who knows? We'll just have to see what the future holds. Thank you so much, everyone. Goodbye.